Alrighty, boys and girls, today we are looking at the story Sacawagea by Lise Erdrich, illustrated by Julie Buffalohead. Our essential question is, how do people from different cultures contribute to American history? So, Lise Erdrich is part Native American and a member of the Turtle Mountain Band of Plains Ojibwe. She was inspired to become a writer by her grandfather, who was always writing or telling stories. Her sister Louise is also a writer of books for children and adults. The illustrator, who is, I think, very talented, Julie Buffalohead. She's part Ponca Indian. Julie Buffalohead researched traditional Native American art while in college. She often depicts Native American legends and traditions in her painting. She sometimes uses her painting as a way to explore important topics such as prejudices some people may have about Native Americans. So our genre is biography. To review, bio means life, graph means write. The suffix y means full of, so biography is writing full of life, or writing focused on somebody's life. To prove that it's biography, we can look for information about why the person is important, and opinions and personal judgments based on facts. The events will be in sequence, or time order, because that's how we live our lives, in time order. It's also really important to know, and here I'm going to flip back a little bit, our target skill. We want to know ahead of time that we are looking to find the main idea of the whole text, and page by page we might want to call ourselves to do that skill too. So the text implores us, it asks us, as we read Sacawagea, look for the most important ideas the author presents. The most important ideas are called main ideas. Also look for supporting details that tell more about the main ideas. Use a graphic organizer like the one below, this little bubble map, to help you see the relationship between main ideas and the details that support them. Then we could summarize the most important ideas. A strategy to help us comprehend or understand is to visualize various stages of Sacagawea's journey. That'll help us identify the main ideas also, and the supporting details at each part of their journey. Descriptive details in the text will help you form clear mental pictures of the people and places Sacawagea and her companions visited. I think that sounds about right, because your brain is really smart, and whether you realize it or not, you're probably going to accidentally, or maybe on purpose, but you will probably naturally want to visualize the most important aspects. Sometimes our brain just wants to focus on what's most interesting to us, and sometimes that could be a silly detail. But that's the whole point of reading, to enjoy and to learn. All right, let's get some background knowledge from Preview the Topic. Native American history. In the early 1800s, most of the American West was inhabited only by Native Americans. The Native Americans had deep knowledge of the lands where they lived. They were experts at locating food, making shelters, and finding their way in the wilderness. In 1804, Captains Meriwether Lewis and William Clark led an expedition to explore the western half of North America. Along the way, a young Shoshone woman named Sacawagea joined the expedition as a guide and translator. As you read Sacawagea, you'll learn about the many contributions she made to the expedition. This is awesome. Lewis and Clark are famous explorers. Sacawagea is also very famous as an explorer. I have a golden dollar coin that has Sacagawea's face on it. That's pretty cool, because she's a Native American and she's a woman. And usually our coins and our money feature men. History sometimes doesn't recognize women in the past. Society's getting a bit better at that as time goes on. An idea we could talk about is a new place we might like to explore, the supplies we'd need, who we'd take with us. We could even write a short story about our exploration. That's a fun idea that the texts give us. That would be a good way to extend your learning. Here is the first page of the text. Okay. In the early 1800s, teenage Sacawagea is a Shoshone Indian living in the Knife River villages in what is now South Dakota. When she was a child, Hidatsa Indians kidnapped her from her home in the Rocky Mountains. Since then, she has lived with them on the Great Plains, far from her family. Sacawagea has learned many things from the Hidatsa, including how to grow food. She is now married to a French-Canadian fur trapper named Toussaint Charbonneau. Meanwhile, Captains Meriwether Lewis and William Clark have been preparing for the Corps of Discovery. They and their team, which includes a large black Newfoundland dog, are about to start a long journey of exploration all the way to the Pacific Ocean. Here in Pennsylvania, we live on the East Coast, or near the East Coast, near the Atlantic Ocean. So the Pacific Ocean is all the way across America on the west side, and when we're looking at a flat map, that would be the far left, like California and Oregon. Here comes the real story. On Miss Fastenal's birthday, on May 14th, 1804, a few years before my birthday though, a crew of more than 40 men set off against the Missouri River current in a keelboat and 2 large canoes called pirogues. The Corps of Discovery was underway. The expedition arrived at the Knife River villages at the end of October. That took a while. They were greeted with great excitement. Sacawagea heard tales of a gigantic black dog that traveled with the explorers. She heard that a fierce and awesome white man with black skin was among the crew. This was York, the slave of Captain Clark. The explorers built a fort and called it Fort Mandan. Then they settled in to spend the winter at the Knife River villages. Lewis and Clark soon learned that they would need horses to cross the Rocky Mountains. The people of the villages told them they could get the horses from the Shoshone when the expedition reached the mountain passes. The wily Charbonneau proposed that they hire him as a guide and interpreter. He did not speak Shoshone, but Sacawagea did. He told her they would be joining the Corps of Discovery in the spring. This was exciting news, but Sacagawea's mind was on other matters. She was soon to become a mother. By the picture, it looks like she's pregnant with a baby, so she is a mother. That's awesome, but that must be a stressful time to start an expedition. In February, the time for Sacawagea to have her baby. It was a long, difficult birth. Captain Lewis wanted to help her. He gave a crew member 2 rattlesnake rattles to crush and mix with water. Ew. Just a few minutes after drinking the mixture, Sacawagea gave birth to a baby boy. He was named Jean-Baptiste Charbonneau, but Captain Clark called him Pompey. Before long, the boy was known to everyone as Pomp. On April 7th, 1805, the Corps of Discovery started west, struggling upstream on the mighty, muddy Missouri in 2 pirogues and 6 smaller canoes. Pomp was not yet 2 months old. As Sacawagea walked along the riverbank, she carried Pomp on her back in a cradle board or wrapped up snug in her shawl. Every member of the Corps of Discovery was hired for a special skill: hunter, blacksmith, woodsman, sailor. As an interpreter, Charbonneau was paid much more than the other crew members, but his skills as a sailor, guide, and outdoorsman were very poor. The only thing he did well was cook buffalo sausage. Sacagawea did what she could to help the expedition, even though she was paid nothing. As she walked along the shore with Captain Clark, Sacagawea looked for plants to keep the crew healthy. She gathered berries or dug for wild artichoke roots with her digging stick. Her Shoshone childhood had prepared her well for this journey. The Corps had been traveling less than 2 months when near disaster struck. Charbonneau was steering a boat through choppy waters when a sudden high wind tipped it sideways. He lost his wits and dropped the rudder while the boat filled with water. The expedition's valuables were spilling overboard. Charbonneau was ordered to right the boat or be shot. Sacagawea stayed calm and rescued the captain's important things: journals, gunpowder, medicines, scientific instruments, every bundle she could reach. Without these supplies, the expedition could not have continued. A few days later, they came to a beautiful river. The grateful captains named it after Sacagawea. By June, the Corps was entering mountain country. Soon they could hear the distant roaring sound of the Great Falls of the Missouri. Captain Lewis thought the waterfall was the grandest sight he had ever seen, but there was no way to get past it by boat. It would take the Corps nearly a month just to get around the Great Falls and the 4 waterfalls they found just beyond it. The crew built creaky, clumsy wagons to carry their boats and supplies. Battered by hail, rain, and wind, the men dragged the wagons over sharp rocks and prickly pear cactus that punctured their moccasins. One day, a freak cloudburst caused a flash flood. Rocks, mud, and water came crashing down the canyon. Sacagawea held onto her son as tight as she could, while Clark pushed and pulled them both to safety. Pomp's cradleboard, clothes, and bedding were swept away by the rushing water, but all 3 were unharmed. By the middle of July, the Corps was once again paddling up the Missouri. They reached a valley where 3 rivers came together, a place Sacagawea knew well. If she was upset to see it again, she did not show. The captains learned how Sacagawea had been captured and her people killed. Sacagawea recognized a landmark that her people called Beaver Head Mountain. She knew they must be nearing the summer camp of the Shoshone. Here's a really interesting part here. Onomatopoeia. I know that's a weird word, but it's pronounced onomatopoeia. In the first paragraph on this page is the word roaring. Roar is an example of onomatopoeia. That is, the sound and meaning of the word are similar. Find another example of onomatopoeia in the second paragraph on this page. Wow, that's awesome. So onomatopoeia means a word sounds like what it means. Okay, let's see. So first there was roar. I understand that. When I say roar, it kind of sounds like an angry sound, like a rushing waterfall or a hungry lion could make. Let's see. Here's the first paragraph. Here's the second paragraph. Let's read it again and see what we find. The crew built creaky, clumsy wagons to carry their boats and supplies. Battered by hail, rain, and wind, the men dragged the wagons over sharp rocks and prickly pear cactus that punctured their moccasins. Well, you know what I'm thinking of? There's one word there that does sound like the noise an object makes. Maybe you heard it a little bit when I said creaky. Creaky. Sometimes creaky, if you pronounce it in a funny way, it can kind of sound like a rocking chair going creak or a door going creak. I can think of other words. Creaky kind of sounds like squeaky. Somehow the vowel sound in those words reminds me of what they actually sound like when I describe when something could be described as creaky or squeaky. So when I think of a creaky wagon, I think of a wagon that was just kind of thrown together real fast, or it wasn't made that well, and it's kind of creaking because, well, it's poorly made, and it might come apart over the bumpy, rough trail. So that's onomatopoeia. Definitely listen to see if you hear any more. Nearly 2 weeks later, Sacawagea walked along the river, scanning the familiar territory. She spotted some men on horseback far ahead of them. Suddenly, Captain Clark saw Sacawagea dance up and down with happiness, sucking her fingers. He knew this meant that these were her people, the Shoshone. An excited crowd greeted the explorers at the Shoshone camp. Although years had passed since Sacawagea had been captured, a Shoshone woman recognized her. She rushed up to Sacawagea and threw her arms around her. Lewis and Clark had discovered that their need for Shoshone horses was even greater than they thought. There was far more mountain country between the Missouri River and a water route to the Pacific than they expected. A grand council was called to discuss the matter. Sacawagea was to be one of the translators. Interpreting for the men at the chief's council was a serious responsibility. Sacawagea wanted to do her best. But when she looked at the face of the Shoshone chief, she burst into tears. He was her brother, Kamawayat. Sacawagea jumped up, threw her blanket over her brother, and wept. Kamawayat was moved too, but the council had to continue. Though tears kept flooding back, Sacawagea kept to her duty until the council ended. Sacawagea spent the last days of August with her people. The time passed too quickly. Before long, the expedition had to mount Shoshone horses and continue across the mountains, leaving their boats behind. The next part of their journey almost killed them. The mountain paths were narrow and dangerous, especially once it started to snow. Their feet froze. They didn't have enough to eat, and the mountains seemed without an end. Finally, the expedition emerged on the Pacific side of the Rockies. There, Nez Perce Indians helped them make new boats and agreed to keep the horses in case they returned that way in the spring. With great relief, the crew dropped their boats into the Clearwater River and let the current carry the expedition toward the ocean. At the beginning of November, the explorers noticed a sound that could only be the crashing of waves. They had finally reached the Pacific Ocean. Hey, when I read crashing, I think it was onomatopoeia. Crashing. It really makes me think of a crashing wave. It's just got that sound to it. That's so cool. The crew voted on where to make winter camp. Sacawagea was allowed to vote too. She wanted to stay where she could find plenty of wapato roots for winter food. They set up camp not far from the ocean in case a ship came to take them back home. But by now, people back east were sure the whole Corps was long dead. No ship came for them. A cold rain soaked the crew as they cut logs and built Fort Clatsop. The hunters went to find game while Sacawagea dug for wapato roots in the soggy ground. Here we're asked, and it's suggested to us, that we take a moment to analyze the text. Text structure. Briefly summarize what has happened thus far in the text. Okay, so Sacagawea's husband agreed to be the guide, and he kind of pretended he could be a good translator. And he brought his wife, Sacawagea, who was actually the one who was good at traveling and translating. Along the way, her husband caused mishaps, but she solved problems. And they traveled really far. They experienced a lot of hardship, and it's been taking like months, over a year. And now it's wintertime, and they're making a camp. See if you can add any details to that. Next question. Why did they set up a winter camp? Well, because They made it to the Pacific Ocean, and now they can't travel all the way back because it's winter. They need to pause where they are and make a camp so that they can always have a campfire and always have food and be safe. The last question here is, how is the text organized? If I think about it for a minute, I can see it's telling me what happened first, next, third, fourth, fifth, next one after that. It's in time order. A fancy word for time order is chronological, or you could say sequence. Alrighty, let's see. Christmas Day was rainy and dreary, but the Corps was determined to celebrate. The men fired a salute with their guns and sang. Sacawagea gave Captain Clark a fine gift of 24 white weasel tails. In early January, Clark heard from some Indians that a whale had washed up on shore. He decided to go to the ocean to get blubber for the crew to eat. They were tired of their diet of lean, spoiled meat and fish. It's been so long that her baby is standing up. It's the whale. Sacagawea gathered up her courage and insisted that she be allowed to accompany Clark. She hadn't traveled so far to leave without ever seeing the ocean, and she wanted to see that monstrous creature. The captains agreed to let her go. At last, Sacagawea saw the Pacific Ocean. She stood and stared at the great waters stretching endlessly in front of her. On the beach was the great skeleton of the whale. It was an amazing sight, nearly as long as 20 men lying end to end. The whale had been picked clean, but Clark was able to buy some blubber from the Indians to feed his men. Who do you think picked it clean? The crew stayed busy all winter, hunting, sewing moccasins, and making repairs on their equipment. Clark made maps while Lewis worked on his report to President Jefferson. Sacagawea watched over Pomp as he began to walk. Captain Clark called him my little dancing boy. He had become very attached to Sacagawea and her son. When the time came, it would be hard for them to part. Spring arrived, and it was time to go back the way they had come. In late March, the Corps of Discovery headed up the Columbia River to retrieve their horses from the Nez Perce. Wow, Pompey has only known a life of traveling so far. At a place called Traveler's Rest, the expedition divided into two groups. Sacagawea would help guide Clark's group south to the Yellowstone River. Lewis's group would head northeast to explore the Marias River. At the end of July, Clark's group came across an enormous rock tower on the banks of the Yellowstone. Clark named it Pompey's Tower in honor of his beloved little friend. In the side of the rock he carved, W. Clark, July 25th, 1806. The two groups met up on August 12th. 2 days later, Sacagawea gazed once again upon the round earth lodges of the Knife River villages. She had been gone a year and 4 months. Lewis and Clark prepared to return to St. Louis. Before they left, Captain Clark came to talk to Sacagawea and Charbonneau. He offered to take Pomp back to St. Louis with him. He would see that the boy had a good education and would raise him as his own son. Sacagawea knew that Captain Clark would take good care of her child, but he was not even 2 years old. She couldn't let him go yet. Sacagawea and Charbonneau promised they would bring Pomp to visit Clark in a year or so. On August 17, 1806, Sacagawea watched as the Corps of Discovery set off again down the Missouri River. Her journey of exploration was over, but the Corps of Discovery still had hundreds of miles to go. What is the main idea of the selection? What do you think the main idea was? Well, let's think about what happened real quick. There's two captains. They want to explore America. They need some help. They hire Charbonneau. He brings along his wife. What does Sacawagea do the whole time, no matter what? Even though she was a new mommy, she was pregnant and she gave birth and then she had to carry her son all the time. Well, no matter what happened, she was willing to help out. She helped out even when it was so emotional to finally see her brother again. And he was the chief, so that was pretty cool. She must have been touched to see how successful he was. She helped out even when they were so angry at her husband for spilling their supplies into the water. She helped out even when that giant rainstorm came and her baby clothes got washed away. She helped out so much. There's a lot of details in the text that we could look back to prove that main idea. Okay? In your textbook, you'll also see this, page 604 and 605, and you can look more, and you could make yourself a chart, some details that support the main idea. Later on this week, I will most likely give you an assignment about that, where we say, here's the main idea. Now, what details can you find to support that? I hope this read aloud was helpful for you.